With this session update, I'm Shannon Loehrke. This morning, Senate Majority Leader Paul Gazelka held a media availability with the press corps to outline important issues he hopes to resolve by the end of the legislative session. Here's some of what he had to say.
Give you some just opening perspective and comments, and then I'll take any questions you have. But this session it's been unlike any other session we've had. Both trying to navigate COVID and the emergency that brought on us all, and just trying to do a session under the guidelines of CDC and the Minnesota Department of Health. And we are managing to do it, but I'll never forget this one. I'll just tell you that. But I wanted to say that even with all of that, there's a lot of things that we have accomplished that I think Minnesota should be proud that their government is working together. We passed more than $500 million to fight COVID-19, and much of that has been used to buy the personal protection equipment and get ready for a potential surge in the future. And that I think was important, that the public could see that we were doing that together. We passed transparency reforms for prescription drugs and healthcare. I mean, that wasn't COVID-19. That was just something that we've committed to try to keep working on. We passed a bipartisan bill for elections that included this round of HAVA money, Help America Vote Act money, which I think was really important. It also, for the local election places, it's going to help make sure that they have all the resources they need, and that was done in a bipartisan way. And then some long-running issues. Tobacco 21 got done, and I think the reason why I think that really went forward was the vaping part of that we're trying to make sure that kids, as much as possible, don't have a pipeline of vaping products into the high school and the junior high. And so I think we'll see a measurable shift there as a result of doing that. The TCE ban and insulin bills were other two major things that we got done. And like I said, in the midst of this COVID crisis, finding a way to get through some of these issues that have been there a long time. Some things that we're still working on that I think are really important. One of them is the small business grants. This is one of the things that federal stimulus can be used for. The Senate passed a bill, $60 million that we would use from federal funds, and it had huge support on both sides of the aisle. We're still trying to work with the governor to get that done, but that's an important one that I don't want to get somehow not finished by the time we finish here. And then we passed out of the Senate, the economic tax relief bill. It really focused on struggling businesses, so we wanted to delay all taxes into July and waive any penalties that they would have. So that's property taxes, sales tax, income tax, etc. And then there are a bunch of businesses that got Paycheck Protection Program money from the federal government, and we want to conform with the federal government and make sure that that's not taxed in Minnesota. And we're looking to pass Section 179, which is if a small business or a farm buys equipment, they can deduct it up front. The federal government already allows this, but more than ever right now, we think that should get done. And finally, one of the things I think we need to figure out is making sure that the Mall of America stays viable. I believe it's the #1 tourist attraction in Minnesota. They're looking for some relief, not money from the federal government or from the state government, but allowing to access their TIF money or tax increment financing. And so I'm hoping we find a way to get that one done. That wasn't in our tax bill, but it is an issue that has arisen that I think we need to address. So those were some of the key things in that bill. We're also looking for legislative oversight of the $2 billion or so of federal stimulus money. I don't know where we're going to be on that, but we just think it's important that the legislative branch is very involved with the executive branch as we move forward. And so whatever shape that takes, we'll see, but this is one of the things we could do to make that happen. And then finally, well, not finally, but emergency powers is one issue that nobody, I think, when they wrote the Minnesota Constitution, contemplated a long time that you could have emergency powers. And so we want to look at that on the Senate floor today. We have a bill that basically says after 30 days, the House and Senate have to both vote to continue it, which is basically opposite of where we're at right now. As you all know, unless the House and Senate both agree to stop it, it just continues and there's no end in sight. And so we think that should be reformed. One other issue is state contracts. I have made it clear for the last couple of weeks or so that we don't think that the contracts, because they didn't contemplate this huge economic downturn, recession, and maybe worse, that we should give the raises this July. We do think that the benefits and raises that were given last July should remain. The problem is there's no compromise in between that we've asked for. So the choice that I've been given for the Senate is don't approve the contracts, which means they would get a cut, including last July's raise. But that's my only choice because I think it's irresponsible to give a raise this July. I've asked the unions and the governor and the Democrat-controlled House to please reconsider. Back in 2003, they did pass language that basically approved the contracts except for certain aspects of it. So we can do it, we believe, but we don't have agreement from the union negotiators, the governor, or the House. So we'll just have to see where that goes. My hope is in the end we can work out a deal where they get last year's raise and benefit changes, but not this year. And then finally, I know you all want to know if bonding bill is going to get done. I'm absolutely committed to get a bonding bill done. I hope it gets done this session. Speaker Hortman and myself have been working diligently to find a path through. Our chairs have been in discussion, trying to work through what are the things that we can agree on. I do believe that the bill will be over $1 billion in the final package, which would be the first time we went over general obligations over $1 billion. But we think now is a good time to do it, as long as it's focused on roads and bridges, wastewater infrastructure, taking care of the buildings and resources we have. Then the number is not as important as making sure what we focus on. So we'll know by Sunday night if that happens. That's the last time we can pass a bill. And then Monday is just retirement speeches and things like that. So with that, I'll take any questions that anyone has. And Rachel, if you would monitor that and just tell me who's going to ask a question.
Sure thing. Thank you, Senator Gazelka. So the first question I have here is from Bill Werner.
Yeah, Mr. Leader, I want to just follow up on a couple of things that you mentioned last, the bonding bill and also the state employee contracts. I'll take the shorter one first, I guess. State employee contract. So you would not expect any vote on ratification of those in the regular session. Is that reasonable? And the second thing is on the bonding bill, any chance of getting it done in regular session, or does that probably roll to what would likely be a special session in around the 12th of June, I guess?
Yeah, we're still deciding whether or not we want to pass the contracts with language that says they don't get the July raise, but they get last year's raise. That we have to figure out. Some people say that if we do anything towards ratification, that even if we have language that says they don't get it, that maybe they'd actually get it. And so we're still working through that. More importantly, I'm just simply asking everybody to consider where we are, that we, in about 6 weeks, we shifted downward about $4 billion of less revenue. And most people think it's going to be worse by the time we come to November. So we're just asking people to be a part of the solution. I can tell you that the state Senate, that we froze everybody's wages. We are cutting, there's going to be no travel out of state for any meetings of any kind, any Zoom meetings that we do out of session, that those aren't going to be per diem events. So we did a hiring freeze. And so we've taken action. The state government has done a hiring freeze. You can see that people recognize we have a problem. And yet I'm surprised that people are still pushing for a pay raise coming this next July. So that's the first one. And then as far as bonding, the speaker and I are having very good conversations. That we're not very far apart on the things we want there. In addition, I really believe that there are some basic things that we should do in a tax bill that would make a big difference and we should be doing as well. I think I mentioned, but there's a number of taxes that if a small business is struggling and didn't pay, now we're also going to charge them penalties for not paying. And if they were shut down, and some of them are still shut down, how can we expect them to pay sales taxes up front? How can we expect them to pay property taxes when they have no money coming in? So we think there's a number of issues that should also get done related to taxes, and but I do think we're not that far away in what we believe.
So is the bonding bill linked to taxes? I mean, I know you're probably not going to stay strategically at this point, Mr. Leader, but I mean, do you kind of need to have both of them in order to move a bonding bill out of the regular session?
Well, I think the biggest issue is the minorities of the House and Senate also have to agree, and it takes 41 votes in the Senate, which I believe we'll have. I just don't know if they have a majority of votes that they need in the House. That's the bigger issue.
Yeah.
Speaker Hortman and I are not that far apart on the rest of it.
Okay, and then the House folks, I assume your counterparts, Republican counterparts in the House, want to see that some sort of tax provisions, right? I mean, is that fair to say?
Well, I think they do, but I don't know exactly what they're asking for. That's kind of a negotiation that they have to figure out, and so there have been some public statements, but I think the fact that when the governor lifted the shelter at home, that brought both sides closer together as far as the solutions that we need going forward. And so, it's not like any end of session. It seems like it always goes right into Sunday, and I'm always trying to get it done by Saturday, but I know it's going into Sunday night. We'll just see how it all plays out.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, up next, Mary LaHammer.
Yeah, well, Bill and you just covered two of the questions I had about linking bonding bill and taxes. So the next question I have is about how the end of session comes together and a possible special session. Assuming you need to come back, are you seeking any pre-agreement with the governor before you go home sine die about when he would call you back?
No, and the reason why is he's already laid out, I believe publicly, that the next time to extend emergency powers would be June 12th. And when that would happen, we would be adjourned. And so we would automatically be called in, because that's the requirement, into a special session. And so I have no plans to agree on any parameters of that. If he extends emergency powers, then the legislative branches can decide how long a special session lasts. The governor calls it, the legislative branch decides when it ends. And so, that callback would be, I hope, is because we're just focused on COVID-19. I'm hoping we get all of the rest of the things that normally would get done, but there's no promises there. But I do expect it to be June 12th.
So again, that would break precedent as well, because usually there is pre-agreement with the legislative leaders and the governor since kind of the beginning of time. So that would be a completely new procedure too, right?
Yeah, everything is different here. I mean, in my lifetime, we've never been near this length of emergency powers. I don't know if ever. That's your job to figure out, but it's been a long time. And I think once it's all done, it would not surprise me if we reform how we do this. And but in the middle of it, I'm not sure we'll have any reform.
All right, and Troy Van Oot, you had a question about the Mall of America aid. Do you want to go ahead and ask that?
Oh, sure. I was just wondering, is that in a bill? It's more of just a clarification. Is there a bill already moving through committee on that, a separate bill, or were you hoping to amend that into the existing House bill in the House, or like how is that? Where is that in the process?
Yeah, so the tax bill has already been passed off the Senate floor, but it's an issue that has come to light that they are struggling as a result of shutting down everything. I believe they collected 5% of the last month's rent across the Mall of America. And so that creates a huge financial problem. And it's a major tourist attraction for Minnesota, for the whole world. And there is the potential that they could access some of the funds in the TIF, I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, account. And so that's a discussion. There's not 100% agreement on that. I believe the city of Bloomington does not support that. And so that's what we have to figure out. But we have to be careful with where they're at financially. And so I want to explore that. I'm asking the governor and the speaker to take a look at it as well. And so stay tuned.
Okay, so there's no language yet that's been released on that. You're just hoping it gets into one of the bills in the final negotiations.
Well, there's no language that I have specifically seen, but I am now aware of the problem, and I'm asking. It wouldn't be difficult language to do, but I have not seen any.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next on my list is Steve Karnowski. I know, Steve, you want to ask about the Environmental Natural Resource Trust Fund. So Senator Gazelka, if you can make comments on that, please do if there's a chance of having that bill. Otherwise, I can have Senator Ingebrigtsen follow up.
I would rather have Senator Ingebrigtsen follow up. I'm not tracking that one. That doesn't mean it's not important. It's just there's other ones that I'm focused on to make sure we get done.
Got it. Steve, do you have a second question that you want to ask? It looks like budget cutting bill that's more likely in the special session.
So as far as the budget, we have asked Commissioner Myron Franz to look at state government now and what are some of the things we can do to control spending, because what's going to happen at the end of the year is we're going to get a November forecast, and had we not planned now, it just makes next year much more difficult. And I mentioned that we had conversations about doing a hiring freeze, and they have done that. And I'm hoping that they're looking across the board. If we make decisions now, I think we can protect maybe all the workers, or certainly more workers. So that would be one of the things that I think we should be looking at. And then just meeting the budget next year. And so anything we can do right now is really important. But I haven't heard anything else from management and budget about cost saving measures, but it's something I'm asking them to look at now. I think Wisconsin already, their governor asked each agency to cut 5% right now. So you can see in different places, California is doing similar things. We should be thinking about that right now, but those are decisions that the executive branch has to make.
Got it. Next on my list is Peter Callaghan. He raised his hand, so you have to ask your question, Peter.
Hi, Senator. I'm not hearing the word supplemental budget anywhere. Is there a separate bill that would look like a supplemental budget that might contain some of the things that people are still talking about, like rental assistance, or that the House likes this MFIP $500 bonus? Is there a supplemental budget?
So I'm focused on not using any general fund money right now, but there is federal stimulus money that can be used for a number of things, rental assistance, CCAP, MFIP, and those are discussions that are ongoing. I think some of them, if we run out of time and they don't get done now, I don't know, but I'm like 99% sure that we're going to be back June 12th. And so we have the opportunity to continue to work on those, because that would be from the federal stimulus money that we use it, or it goes back to the federal government. So I'm not opposed to working on those. We just have to figure out the right language and solutions.
All right. Next on my list, Dana Ferguson. Do you want to ask your question about state employee contracts?
I think that Senator Gazelka answered it for the most part, responding to Steve's question. But I'm curious too, having a special session lined up, does that change the way that you're going into some of these negotiations with the governor's office and the House? Are there issues that you expect you'll kick down the line a little bit?
I'm actually trying to get done whatever we can get done right now. I think the more things that we can accomplish together, the better. And so that if there's a special session June 12th, it's really just focused on COVID-19 and using the resources that we get from the federal government. That's where I think the focus should be. So we're working in earnest. There's just a number of things that we're not that far apart, and that's typical at this time of year. And so, whatever I can get done, and I think the speaker is on the same page. I had hoped that we would have had a solution for the contracts, but there was zero movement from the other side, and we tried to make it as clear as possible that we want to protect last year's wage increases, but we won't do this year's. And so I'm hoping that they realize that we're serious about that, and we try to work it out. So I think our state workers are important. I think what they do is important. And I think many of the rank and file understand what I'm trying to say. With over 600,000 people unemployed in the private sector and people likely not even coming back to a job, and already a $2.5 billion deficit with more likely on the way, most of the rank and file that I've had a conversation with get it. Of course they want to raise, but they also understand, that we're not taking away benefits, and in fact making the decisions now could preserve more of their jobs if this is worse than we all think it's going to be.
All right. Next question is from Esme Murphy.
Esme.
Hopefully she's.
Esme, you on mute?
We'll circle back to her. I think she called in, so she's not on camera.
Okay.
Tori Vanu, you had a follow-up.
Yes, sorry, a little kid is riding past my house. It's a little noisy. I had a follow-up on the state worker contracts. You mentioned, Senator, that there's still some uncertainty if you try to pass some sort of amended contract bill. Does it go ahead and, ratify the contracts? But can you even do that? Or does the law require, it looks kind of like the law requires an up or down vote on the contracts as is. Like, is there even an option for the legislature to say, we approve these minus the raises, or is that still being sorted out?
Well, our nonpartisan legal staff in the Senate thinks that we can, that it happened in 2003 and was not challenged, but that doesn't mean that somebody wouldn't challenge it. And then I forget when there was language related to the PCA contracts, and what the legislative branch did basically the executive branch said, well, that means you ratified them, even though that was not legislative intent. And so that's why we're still contemplating whether we want to move forward when there has been zero negotiations from the other side, or just position it into special session and let people know exactly where we stand, that we want last year's wage for all the state workers. We want all the benefit adjustments that they did, but we don't want to give them the wage this July. And if we can get to that in special session, we would be strongly supportive of that. I would even say that if things are not what we think it's going to be, and we get to November or February and the forecast is positive, I would even agree to then give retroactive that raise. But I truly believe it's not going to show that, and that's why we're trying to make these decisions right now. And so, we'll see where they're at, but that's why we're contemplating not even doing anything. We haven't made that decision yet.
Esme, are you back with us? Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I have teenage interruptions, not toddler interruptions going on. I know that you were asked about the Mall of America, and I had a slight teenage interruption in that, but can you kind of go over when they first approached you, how big of a problem is it? There are a lot of people questioning the very future of malls themselves. And I think a lot of people might have concerns about the state taking action, in any way to support the mall when so many businesses are really, really having a tough time. Can you kind of explain when they first approached you and how big the problem is, and kind of walk us through it again?
I would say it was within the last couple of weeks. It's hard to remember, Esme. I mean, every day seems like a week in this last period. But they're actually, I believe, want to borrow money from the TIF account that is resources that have come forward for their future expansion. That's what it's all about. And so they're trying to cover their short-term obligations right now as a result of the governor shutting down basically all of the business is related to what they do there. There is virtually no money coming in, but they still have all their debt obligations. And I think it was last month that it was 5% of their rents came in. So it's like they're in hopefully a short-term financial problem as a result of what the state did. But they're not talking about asking for free money. They're talking about using money set aside in a TIF account. I believe I'm saying that correct, that they would borrow, in other words, pay back to get through this crisis right now. And so that's what they're asking. Senator Wickland does not support that, and that's her district. And so we didn't have all the information as we passed our tax bill, but I do think it's something that we should pay attention to. I believe it's the #1 tourist attraction in Minnesota, draws from all over the world. I think it's good for Minnesota. So we just have to figure that one out.
Did they give you a dollar figure for how much this is costing them, or how much relief they need from that TIF account?
If they did, I don't remember it.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, next question is from Shannon Loehrke.
Hi, Senator. I'm just curious, is there agreement with the House to having the legislative oversight of the federal COVID money? And if so, doesn't that involve more ongoing legislative action in order to, piecemeal it out as it comes in?
That's a good question. So the federal money right now, if we do nothing, the LAC, I'm just drawing a blank at what too many acronyms, but legislative oversight is how it would work. We have 10 days to approve the request that the governor makes. It happens no matter what after 10 days. So it's more advisory. I think it's Legislative Advisory Council. But what we're proposing is that a large chunk of the money has a little more restrictions. The House and Senate majority and minority would be on a committee that would work through those requests, and we would also put another $200 million into the COVID-19 fund, which is almost immediate action. It can't be more than 24 hours decisions, and many of the decisions we made to get personal protection equipment all came out of that COVID-19 fund. And so my proposal is that we have legislative oversight over most of it. The legislative body is supposed to be the bodies that do appropriations, but that we would fill up the COVID-19 fund again as well, so that the governor would have immediate action on many of the things that they still may need. For us, it feels like we've made it through the emergency time. We are now where we need to be on PPE, personal protection equipment. We're now where we need to be on ICU beds, where we have facilities. If there is a huge loss of life, we're ready on that. So everything, the testing, we're ready on that. And so we want to move back towards more of the cooperation of the legislative branch and the executive branch, but the way it's set up right now, that is decided only when the House and Senate together agree that it's removed. But so those are the things working together. But I do think overall, Minnesotans mostly want to know, are you just working together? And so we are doing that. Even though we try to modify things, we are working together.
Thank you.
Okay, and then we got Ricardolopez. You want to go ahead and ask your question?
Thanks. Hi, Senator. I just wanted to get a sense of when the lawmakers are going to start addressing the budget deficit. I'm curious if that's something that you anticipate will start happening during a potential special session, or if that will be left up to next year's legislature to address. And also wanted to ask about what role lawmakers will have in deciding how much of the budget reserve to use to address the deficit.
Very good question. So what I have said, I think we should be working right now at reducing spending. I'm not interested in supporting any shifts, of any kind, and I'm not interested in proposing any tax increases. But if we start controlling spending now, it makes the picture in November or February much better. And so we definitely will have conversations about that. It's actually not as easy as people think, to try to cut things and you say what program. I know in 2011, I believe every agency cut 5%, and we just asked them to find it within their agencies. I mentioned that Wisconsin has done that already. That would be a good step that the governor could ask of all the agencies, and then they find it. And then once we get to next year, in November, we're going to know a lot. The elections are going to determine who's in charge. I think if it's divided government where Republicans keep the Senate, and we know the governor is going to be there, I think as far as for Minnesotans, it's both sides working together. It worked pretty well this last couple of years. And so we'll see at that time frame, if we're 5 billion or 7 billion or 8 or 10 billion short, then there's a lot of things that we have to look at to close that gap. And as you all know, we have to balance the budget in Minnesota, and we can't print money. So it's either we reduce spending or we raise revenue. And so that's what the big discussion will be next year. But this year, I think it's about reducing spending and seeing how bad it is once we get to November.
Great, thank you.
All right, seeing no more questions, that will end the press conference. Thanks everyone for coming today.
Yeah, thanks. I almost missed the fact that we're kind of doing it this way. It's funner the other way, but thank you for what you guys do, and we'll talk to you later.
Good night. Thank you.
Yeah, bye now.